so your floating trim won't stay in tune and you don't know why. No worries, because in this video, I'm gonna use this busted old licensed Floyd Rose trim to show you the top 5 reasons why your trim won't really cooperate. But make sure you stick around to the end because, you guessed it, free promo codes for some cheap gear. All right, this is the Axe, let's go! All right guys, welcome back to the channel. For those of you that are new, my name is Nick. I get it, if you're not too experienced with the floating trim or Floyd Rose, they can be a pain to maintain. I think I just rhymed there. But then on top of that, when they don't do what they're supposed to do, they become more of a bear. Lucky for you, there are some super common things that make your floating trim just not work properly, so let's get into that. This right here is an extremely worn down and beat up Jackson licensed Floyd Rose that I'm gonna use to show you different parts on this thing that are probably contributing to your Floyd Rose problems. Just about every component on this thing is, for lack of a better term, screwed up, so it's actually a really great teaching tool to show you the things that could potentially be wrong and the things that are frustrating you with that trim. So speaking of which, starting with number 1, your trim is old. Yes, this is the most common problem I see when repairing floating trims. Now this isn't as easy as like, yo, your shit is too old to work. This depends on the materials, quality, and the type of trim that you have on your guitar. Original Floyd Rose trims and trims like Schaller and some Gotos are made with hardened steel and are really made with better materials. So age is a factor for those trims as well, but even more so for cheaper trims like Floyd Rose Specials or some of the licensed Floyd Roses that have those cheaper metals. Those trims tend to use a lot of alloys, just like this licensed Jackson. Look at the wear and tear on this trim. You would rarely see this on an original Floyd Rose, even if it was like barely maintained. All right, number 2, you could have a problem with your knife edges. So this is where a lot of problems are seen with the floating trim design. The knife edge is the point where the base plate meets those tremolo studs that are anchored into the guitar. This joint is where the tremolo actually pivots to alter the pitch of the strings. Basically, it's the fulcrum in which the whole system hinges upon. See what I did there? Now, properly set up floating trims that are made with good materials rarely have knife edge issues. And trims made with weaker materials are bound to have knife edge problems because of the dynamics of how it works. These problems can range from getting stuck out of pitch, not maintaining tuning, and then also flat out grinding against the actual tremolo studs. First things first, to fix this, make sure that your trim is level with the guitar body. But you already did that because that would be a rookie mistake in Bush League, right? Next, and this is really common on guitars that you get secondhand or ones that have aftermarket materials, check to make sure the tremolo studs and the tremolo are made of the same material. This is super important because different metals have different densities, and the less dense metal will get ground down by that higher dense metal. This inevitably causes knife edge disasters, let me tell you. And then last, you could really screw up your knife edges and the studs for that matter if you're adjusting the trim height under tension. Always, and I mean always, adjust your trim height at the studs when the guitar is out of tension, meaning loosening up the strings. If you look closely at these knife edges, you can tell that there's divots in the metal and damage because this trim is made with cheap materials. And also look at the damage to these tremolo studs. Not pretty. Part of this is because this trim was constantly adjusted under tension. When you do this over and over with crappy, cheap base plates, it's inevitable that the knife edges are going to take a hit. All right, now the third reason your trim won't cooperate, your saddles suck. Yes, your saddles suck, and the saddles are these blocks that are attached to the base plate that actually lock your strings into the trim. These things are kind of a complex system within the already complex trim, and they do differ from manufacturer to manufacturer. We'll mainly be looking at the Floyd Rose style block that's on this licensed Jackson Floyd Rose. Now take a look at your saddles. Look at the point where the strings kind of come out of the saddle and lie within that groove. Depending on your tremolo's age and materials, strings over time tend to grind deep grooves in those channels that can really mess up the tuning and intonation of the guitar. Going back to my dusty old Jackson licensed Floyd Rose, can you see right here on these grooves that are ground down, you can see the color change and a little bit of a depression. It's a real bummer, but these can be fixed relatively cheaply. Want to know how? The saddles can be replaced. And if you have a good base plate with good knife edges, this is probably the way to go because you really don't want to throw that out. For instance, Floyd Rose original saddles that are made out of hardened steel really run about like 70 to 80 bucks for a 6-piece set. and then they'll only get cheaper from that if you decide to downgrade on the quality of metals. One quick thing before we wrap up the saddles is that the actual locking mechanism of the saddle can be an issue if you're having, say, constant tuning problems or like string breakage that happens over and over. Look to see if these tiny little blocks that are found in the saddle are worn or grooved. Sometimes in trim models that come from cheaper materials or that aren't QC'd as well, the little blocks have burrs on them, and those burrs can start to cut into the string when they're locked in and actually cause them to break. But this goes for all trims. Remember, when you lock the string into the saddle, you don't need to wrench down on that thing. Just make sure you have a good solid clamp and then just let it ride. That's a great way to preserve those blocks. All right, number 4, your intonation is off. Yes, the confusing word, intonation. I feel like all guitarists always talk about it and they don't really know what it means. But breathe easy, my friends. I'm gonna try and break it down Barney style. When I do that, it usually becomes more complex, but just hang in there. Intonation, what does it mean? Simply, pitch accuracy, meaning the extent to which your strings or the notes are in tune. You may have seen before true temperament frets, which are the really squiggly ones that look really odd on a guitar. If you didn't know this, guitars are not a perfect instrument and can basically not achieve a very perfect level of intonation. Now, these true temperament frets try to get a little bit closer. Now, when it comes to intonation for a floating trem, it's all about the saddle blocks and how they're adjusted and their distance to the actual nut at the headstock. You can check if your saddles are seated correctly, providing better intonation by doing this. First thing, tune your guitar with the nut wide open, then choose a string and hit a natural harmonic on the 12th fret. After checking that tuning, then on the same string, press down on the 12th fret, plucking a real note, right? And then checking that tuning as well. If the fretted note is flat compared to the harmonic, then you know that your saddle actually needs to be moved up closer to the nut. If the fretted note is sharp compared to the harmonic, then you need to actually move the saddle back a little bit. Now, if you look at this licensed Jackson Floyd Rose, you can tell all the saddles are kind of in different spots. Some of them are in the same, but they've moved and adjusted based off the intonation that was required for that guitar. So lastly, the 5th and final reason your trem isn't cooperating is you haven't given it enough time. So these systems are not only complex, but they vary from guitar to guitar. You could have the perfect tremolo set up in the perfect position, but what if your guitar's messed up or the guitar neck has too much relief? What if your tremolo springs are getting old, losing tension, or the spring screws are getting loose? Bottom line is I can give you all the tips, techniques, and diagnostic cues for your trem, but the thing is every trem is going to be unique to you. Take all the tips that I've given you in this video and old videos and play around with them and see and diagnose what's actually going on with your trem. You'll eventually know your trem best and learn about the system as a whole. Trust me, give it time and you'll turn into your very own guitar tech, and there really is no like National Academy for floating trems that you can go to, so play around with it. Okay, who wants to save some money on some phenomenal audio gear, eh? You do, I can see it. So have you been on the fence for buying a mic that you want to start your own podcast? What about an audio interface or even studio headphones? I've partnered with Mayono Audio to bring you 10% off their entire store at mayono.com using the promo code FAZE10 at checkout. Yes, 10% off everything, not a certain mic, a certain pair of headphones, a certain interface, everything. We personally use Mayono microphones on the Phase Splitter podcast that occurs right here in the studio, and we love them and wouldn't change them for the world. So go ahead and visit mayono.com, link in the description, and use the code FAZE10 at checkout to save 10%. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss content like this. See you in the next video. Later.